And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Deputy Attorney General.
All right, you've been listening to U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, of course, talking about Binance and the CEO pleading guilty, agreeing to pay billions in fines, ultimately, really at the core of what was going on, allowing illicit actions to transact freely, really breaking it down in terms of that. We did hear before the Treasury Secretary from U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland talking about the violations, the fines, and exactly what was going on. We want to get into it a little bit and just the significance of this ruling and these fines, if you will. With us right now is June Grosso. She's Bloomberg News legal analyst and host of Bloomberg Law weeknights at 10 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio. June, what is front and center? What is most important in terms of what we just heard?
Well, I mean, it's a huge settlement. It's the biggest they've ever had. But when you look on the side of what's happening with the CEO, Zhao, he's back on a plane to the United Arab Emirates. So he made his plea in Seattle federal court, and then he's going to come back. His deal is he will waive his right to appeal, provided his sentence doesn't exceed 18 months. So think of what was alleged here, and an 18-month sentence.
Could have been much more.
And also he's stepping down, but he's only stepping down until the monitor that's put in place is in place for 3 years. Then he can resume his position, according to what I've read. So Sam Bankman-Fried is asking, why not me?
So it's kind of like
why not Sam Bankman-Fried?
Because Zhao was in a place where there's no extradition treaty. I mean, that's what I was thinking.
But he came to the U.S. to plead guilty.
Yes, but that was after the deal was made. They made, in other words, he's there. They made the deal, and he flies in. In fact, he said he was a little scared to come to the U.S. to face his plea, but he was reassured by the court's thoroughness. I will return, he said.
So worst case scenario for CZ would be 18 months in prison, or you don't think he'll even receive that?
I can't tell by this whether he's even going to receive that. I mean, that's the max of what he could get. So
why would officials, the U.S. officials, agree to that?
Well, I think that they want to be able to have this cryptocurrency exchange operating, not have a failure like FTX, a crypto implosion, and now they've got it underhand. Now they have a monitor in place, they have the deal in place, they're getting these huge fines that they can point to and say, look at this, look at what we've done. This is the biggest fine we've ever gotten. You heard Janet Yellen saying that.
Unbelievable. Something more for you guys to talk about on your show. June Grosso, Bloomberg News legal analyst, host of Bloomberg Law. Catch it weeknights at 10 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio. All right, folks, we just have about 4 minutes left in today's trading session, counting down to the close. We teased it earlier, we talked about it earlier. Bloomberg Intelligence Chief Equity Strategist Gina Martin Adams is in the house because she's looking about 2024, and this idea of a second dip in the U.S. economy, this seems to really kind of is a big focus of the research you're doing here. Tell us what we need to know, Gina.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things that you need to know about our broader outlook. The first is our economic regime model, which signaled to us that something pretty meaningfully to the downside was coming in 2022, has triggered another downside risk for 2024. What it says is the broader U.S. economy is a very low probability that it's in recovery anymore. What's interesting about the model is not only did it correctly signal for us
to watch out. It feels that way, to be fair.
But yeah, right. Yeah. It correctly signaled for us to watch out for an earnings recession in the S&P 500 in 2022. And then it also said, watch out for some degree of recovery in 2023. So we want to pay some attention to this because it does suggest that there are earnings risks emerging into 2024. Now, what's also interesting about this is it's never done this before. We've never seen a double dip in this model to this degree. We've never seen a dip, a little recovery, and then a dip to this extent. So it does also suggest that volatility is still here and still here to stay. But I don't think it's necessarily the end-all, be-all for earnings. And I do want to dig into that a little bit because what happens in the economy and what happens in the earnings environment are not necessarily the exact same thing.
All right, will you come back soon?
I will.
I didn't even get to ask her a question.
I know. And we're so sorry because
I blame crypto.
This is supposed to be a quiet, like Thanksgiving, lead up week, and it ain't. Come back soon, okay? Because we all took notes and we want to dig a little bit more into this. All right, folks, don't go anywhere. We've just got about a couple minutes left in today's trading session. Beyond the bell, though, we're getting ready to head over to our TV colleagues.
the Bell. Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Scarlett Fu. We're counting you down to the closing bell. You're here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast with our friends Carol Masser and Tim Stenovic. Welcome to our audiences in full across our Bloomberg platforms here on this Tuesday afternoon. Carol, stocks on the back foot.
Yeah, they absolutely are. I'm thinking about those Fed minutes, a unified front in terms of a cautious way forward. Maybe nothing new, but it's just a reminder that nothing's a given. And I have to say, in a week that I thought was going to be kind of quiet and mellow between what's going on at OpenAI, between what we just all covered, you guys as well, we did too, at the Department of Justice and Treasury, in terms of the crypto world, it's a reminder that there is still a lot going on, and some of these things can ultimately rock kind of the world and also investors.
And maybe investors to taking a breather today, waiting for the big earnings report that we're getting in just a few minutes. Is it going to be another blowout quarter from NVIDIA? The bar is certainly high, Scarlett, but I think that's going to certainly set the tone, whatever NVIDIA says for tomorrow's trade.
Yeah, but maybe the easy gains have been made, right? 5 of the 7 Magnificent 7 names are down, including NVIDIA, and everyone's expecting a blowout quarter. It's just a matter of how much they blow out by.
Yeah, all that going on here. And before we get too deep in NVIDIA, because obviously this is going to dominate the conversation over the next hour or so, I just want to go back to the story we were talking about on Bloomberg Television a while ago, and that, of course, was the announcement of the settlement deal with CZ over at Binance here. Now, Binance putting out a statement, the new CEO, basically saying that Binance remains stronger than ever. That press conference still going on, but it raises a big question here. You basically had the 2 biggest players in the crypto industry effectively now removed from their positions in one way or another here, and it really makes you wonder kind of what the future of this industry is going to be.
You know, to that point, Romaine, that's something I kept saying over and over again here in the studio when I was hearing Secretary Yellen, is that all the argument about crypto being legitimate and being used for legitimate purposes, these 2 things really feed into the worst arguments and the worst criticisms about crypto.
Yeah, particularly in light of CZ's comments dunking on SBF when he was on the ropes about a year ago here. But once again, the new CEO saying that they are collaborating with regulators, and he says that they are reassuring users of Binance here that their funds are safe and sound. Let's go through the markets here. The close, you can see right across the screen, volume lower here in a holiday shortened week, 0.2% drop on the S&P, 0.6% on the NASDAQ, and the Russell, the underperformer here, down more than 1% on the day.
All right, quick check on the S&P 500. Kind of an even split, guys. 228 names to the upside here on this Tuesday, 273 to the downside. Scarlett, 2 unchanged.
And looking at the industry groups and how they fared, you have autos, healthcare equipment, and telecom services leading on the upside, each gaining at least 0.8%. But the downside is where I find it's a lot more interesting. You've got chip companies, all 21 names down, including NVIDIA. Also retail led lower by Lowe's. And by the way, this group has outperformed the broader market this year. So down 1.2% on the day. And banks also losing ground by 0.75%.
All right, as we await for NVIDIA earnings, let me get to the top gainer in the S&P 500, folks. It was Agilent Technologies, just finishing off its best
when was the last time you said that?
I don't even know exactly. Up about 8.7%. Funny. Life sciences company, we know it well. We don't talk about it a lot, but it did come out. Profit and sales for the 4th quarter did top expectations that were set by the street. Analysts also see the firm's 2024 guidance as a sign of demand stabilizing. So some optimism there, and that's where investors were buying into. Number 2.
You know, I was just real quickly, because we were joking about this earlier, and I was looking. I mean, you have to go back to March of 2020, the last time it had a move like this. And if you exclude March of 2020 as an outlier, you have to go back all the way to 2004 to see a move like this.
Yeah, investors digging deep, right? In this market says something. Tesla, however, the number 2 gainer in the NASDAQ 100, up about 2.4% here. Looking for news, kind of a weird bag, or if you will, a mix of news. But India said to be closer to an agreement with Tesla to import XEVs and also set up a factory within 2 years. This is according to folks in the know who are familiar with what the Indian government is thinking about this. This stock, though, up 95% year to date. And retailers were still getting earnings. We're going to get a few after the close. Burlington Stores, this one was an outperformer in today's session, up 20% in the trade. $10 billion retail.
Explain that to me.
I don't know. I don't know. I really don't. It did post a third quarter profit and same-store sales beat. Analysts said the results were better than feared. I love that. Better than we thought. We thought you were going to do really badly. It could bring some relief for shares. Well, it did certainly in today's session.
All right, you got the gainers, Carol. I got the decliners. Let's take a look at the worst performer in the S&P 500 on a points basis. Worth taking a look at Microsoft. That's the one that takes it down 1.16%. Remember, the company did reach a new all-time high yesterday. Also worth taking a look at Microsoft in the wake of everything that's happening with regard to the drama at OpenAI. Sam Altman, will he or won't he go back to OpenAI? Our own Bloomberg News team reporting that just in the last couple of hours that Sam Altman and the members of the OpenAI board and the interim company's CEO have opened negotiations aimed at a possible reinstatement back at OpenAI. Also, we're taking a look at shares of Ford falling on the day today.
Why, Tim?
Why go back to
Yeah, why
OpenAI?
try to put this back together?
You know, it's funny. Carol and I were talking about this earlier. If you're like, went to sleep on Friday and we're still asleep now and perhaps woke up tomorrow and Sam Altman was still,
You missed nothing.
You missed nothing. I said, a lot of spilled ink and a lot of sleepless nights for our colleagues at Bloomberg News, but...
And a lot of ulcers in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, but we will bring you the latest when we do know. Ford shares down 1.45%. Earlier today, we got the news that Ford is reducing capacity and hiring plans at a battery plant that it's building in Michigan because of that weaker demand that it sees for EVs. This is the Marshall factory. It was on pause for a couple months. It's only going to produce enough EV strategy. Romaine includes delaying $12 billion in spending on battery-powered models. Remember back to the most recent report, Ford abandoned plans to build 2 million EVs annually by the end of 2026. Won't say when it expects to reach that milestone, and sales of its F-150 Lightning down 46% in the third quarter.
That's so surprising. I thought that was going to be a hit.
Yeah, we're speaking to the CEO of Blink Charging a little later in the program, and we're going to ask him what's going on with EVs, because they were all the rage, 18 months ago.
People who wanted one have one, and for everyone else, it's pretty expensive, and if you don't have a garage, where are you going to charge it?
Yeah. Let's actually nothing really going on in the yield space today here. Lower pretty much across the board, only by about 1 to 2 basis points depending on where you go. But this is really an earnings day. We are awaiting earnings out of NVIDIA, but earnings for Nordstrom are crossing the wire right now. Let's see if we can go there here, because the shares are lower here in after hours trading, despite the fact that adjusted EPS in the most recent quarter beat by big, 25 cents a share. The street was looking for 12 cents a share. Revenue in the quarter, though, looked like a miss. So $3.32 billion in the most recent quarter. The street was looking for $3.42 billion. So it missed on revenue, but had a big beat on EPS here. I'm not really seeing, here's your guidance going forward here, and this is why the shares are down. Full year revenue expected to be down 4 to 6%, a negative sign in front of both of those numbers. They're given a range of 4 to 6% drop in full year revenue, and saying that full year adjusted EPS also could potentially come in below street estimates. It's range that it's giving, guys, 190 to 210 a share.
I got to say, in the press release, the chief executive officer, and given continued uncertainty and softening consumer spend, Scarlett, we're remaining agile and focused on serving our customers. But they talked about a lot about theft back in August. They also talked about credit card delinquencies were rising gradually. So we'll continue to look through this press release to see if that continues to be of concern.
This goes back to that idea that we're wondering why is Burlington up and Nordstrom is down here.
Yeah.
Because people are trading down from the likes of Nordstrom to the discount retailers, the off-price retailers.
But that's a big trade. Forgive me, but those are two very, very different retailers.
No, you would say it. That's what we're all thinking.
I mean,
It does go.
We're East Coast elites, or what, coastal elites, whatever they are.
It does.
Very
It also
different.
plays into the story that we published on Bloomberg News, the exclusive data that we got from Bloomberg Second Measure earlier today. Romaine, I know you were talking about earlier on the program, that even folks who earn more than $100,000 a year, $100,000 a year and above, are pulling back on that spending, and kind of feeds into the earnings that we got earlier this morning about those big purchases being put off, and about the consumer, even at the high end, weakening a little.
Let me just jump in here, because another specialty retailer did report, and I don't know if you can find Urban Outfitters' stuff at a Burlington or any of those off-price retailers, but third quarter adjusted EPS did beat analyst estimates, 88 cents versus the consensus estimate of 82 cents. And then the retail segment sales rose 5.6%. This is comparable sales. Analysts were looking for a 5.25% increase. Comparable sales, let's see, for these, let me see, Urban Outfitters, I guess that's just the brand itself. The comparable sales dropped 14.2% when analysts were looking for 13.7%. Urban Outfitters claims that it's a lifestyle products company rather than just a apparel company.
But gets us to the thing. I mean, you mentioned that 14% number. I assume that's just for Urban Outfitters,
Yes,
the
that
brand.
brand.
Because we talk about Anthropology
Yep.
and Free People, which have done well. Do they own Madewell, or is that something else? Or
No, that's
I-
J. Crew.
That's J. Crew. But anyway, but it gets to this point as to whether that pillar, because remember you think about Gap and how that sort of didn't work. Remember it worked for a while, having Old Navy, having Gap, and whatever else,
Republic.
Banana Republic. But you wonder where some of these other companies, whether that structure is still going to work for them.
No, it's a really good point. All right, folks, we are obviously waiting for NVIDIA. Hasn't crossed yet, but I know you guys are going to break it down as soon as it does, and we will as well. But that's a wrap.
Who's going to do it better?
We will. Come on. There, and those were earlier in the session, but we do want to mention, we just talked about Nordstrom, and really what is kind of freaking investors out here in the aftermarket is the company's outlook. Seeing fiscal year adjusted EPS of $1.90 to $2.10. They had seen $1.80 to $2.20, and Tim, we've been covering it, but the stock, let me just pull it up. It is down, well, now it's just actually a little higher, up about 0.9% in the aftermarket, but it's bouncing around. It was selling off earlier, but we had a lot of retail earlier today as well.
Yeah, Lowe's shares took a hit after the company cut its annual forecast. Best Buy slumped after reporting third quarter comp sales that trailed the average analyst estimate. Kohl's tanked earlier today after the company reported third quarter comp sales. Dick's Sporting Goods, it was kind of a mixed bag, although I guess you could say kind of Dick's was the outlier here. It raised its profit forecast. When I mentioned that story that richer Americans are starting to pull back on their spending, there's a lot of questions and a lot to get to when it comes to the strength of the American consumer.
I think that's a really important one because we talk about trading down. Mary Lou Gardner has a lot to say about the retail sector. She's Associate Partner for Consumer Packaged Goods, Retail, and Logistics at Infosys Consulting. She joins us on Zoom from Naples, Florida. Mary Lou, how's the retail group doing? And I know it's not oranges to orange, not everybody has the same story, but how would you sum up the retail sector and how is the U.S. consumer doing?
Well, the U.S. consumer is still feeling that tremendous pressure from three areas, right? The rising interest rates, the credit card debt has gone through the roof, and the savings that they had coming out of the pandemic has, really decreased or deflated. And so they're getting more anxious every day about what to spend, where to spend it, and their decisions in terms of discretionary spending are getting more regimented every single day.
So does any of this surprise you, what we heard from these companies, not just in the last 10 minutes, but in the last 24 hours, Dick's sort of excluded?
No, I mean, I think we had some leading indicators with Target and Walmart last week as well, right? They saw that in October, spending really started to slow down in the back half, which gets everyone nervous for the holiday selling season where, retail, that's their bread and butter. And right now, the forecast for the retail selling season is that it's going to be the slowest in the slowest growth in the past 5 years, only expected to be up 3 to 4%. So I think that what you're starting to see is they're looking forward for the next 3 months based off of even what they've seen in October and said, this could be a little bit of a rough year for us. We're not going to get the profits we thought. And we're not going to see the sales, or they're going to be spread out over time.
What does holiday hiring trends tell us about the holiday season?
Well, I mean, the NRF also has said that they expect that trend to be down about 40%. And what we've seen so far.
Wait, you said 40%?
40% from 2021, which was that recent high. So Walmart's a perfect example. They have not hired any seasonal hires.
Wow.
So
I thought I remember seeing Amazon hiring tens of thousands, but that's typically what it does, right?
That's what it typically does. When it's mostly, we haven't heard from Amazon that they haven't been hiring. Macy's cut down their hiring significantly. Across the board, there are just less. There's, 345,000 to 445,000 is what they're predicting, which is 40% down from 2021.
Mary Lou,
which is just
so you mentioned it to the peak of 2021. How does this compare to 2019? Because I'm trying to figure out how much is just getting back to normal, how much is there's something going on, consumers are feeling pressured, which certainly seems to be the case at this point because it feels like there's more and more evidence of that. But give me an idea of how what we are seeing and how it compares to 2019 pre-pandemic.
Yeah, I don't have the exact 2019 numbers, but this slowdown is so significant in the hiring, and there's the combination of the shift to e-commerce. So there's probably maybe more hiring there, less right in the retail brick and mortar. using Amazon as one of the examples. But it still is, it's concerning in a couple of ways, that if you think about how retailers have spread like kind of the importance of the holiday season, and they keep pulling it forward and pulling it forward, I think the consumers got some fatigue, and along with the pressures. So if retailers are not hiring, which is what we've seen, and I don't know the exact numbers to 2019, could get them for you another time, but okay. It would show to me that that drop of 30 up to 40% is nothing we've ever seen before. It would shift by 10 to 15% over the years, depending on what was happening in the economy. But we have that, like I said, that triangulation of that pressure on the consumer. And I know a lot of people that have said that they're pulling back as well, and people who can well afford to. There's so much economic uncertainty, as we all know, and it just makes people nervous.
I got to ask you, and I know you're not a markets person. I know you cover retail, but there does seem to be this disconnect from what we're seeing in the equity and the bond markets in terms of the way that people are thinking where we are in the economy and where the Fed is. Based on what you know and what you see in your work as a consultant who covers retail, would you say that we're in a recession or a recession is on the horizon?
And maybe like a consumer spending recession.
Well, consumers power this economy.
Correct, but the consumers are on the brink of, I think the consumer spending is on the brink of a recession, based off of all of the concerns and all the noise we hear about, the fact that debt has gone up significantly and people have lost their savings. They have to stop spending at some point.
Right. We talked about yesterday, people tapping into their 401ks.
And today, wealthier people, trading down essentially.
So what does this mean in terms of retail names? More fallout, more consolidation? I don't know. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely think we're going to see some fallout. I mean, I was listening to you earlier about the whole Nordstrom, announcement, and that's been on the brink of disaster for a while now. And when you start to see, the prestige market is definitely collapsed and has been challenged. So if that market collapses, and then in between we've had the consolidation and we've had kind of the Amazon takeover happening, we're going to see continue to see a shift in what the retail landscape looks like and how it's defined, and less about brick and mortar, more about e-commerce. But what it looks like today and what it looks like 3 years from now, I think is going to be very, very different, similar to what we saw coming out of the pandemic.
That's so. I mean, I'm really hearing a lot of concern from you. What are you telling clients in order to do? What are you telling clients to do in order to prepare for where you see the consumer going?
Yeah, so getting really, really smart about understanding your consumer preferences, your consumer shopping behaviors. What are they responding to right now? Leveraging more of our, AI and ML to really understand and be targeted in your assortment, be very discreet and not carry too much inventory. I mean, you've seen over the years, retailers have gotten themselves into a lot of trouble around the inventory levels. And there's been some whispers that they're concerned about that again this year, potentially. Yeah. That if the spending doesn't happen as people had hoped it was going to happen, they'll be hung with inventory and we'll have heavy discounts and markdowns again. So another cyclical problem.
Interesting.
So we're trying to tell people to be really smart about that and be targeted and be thinking about it now,
right?
Even before you get to the end of the season and be hung with all that inventory.
Interesting. So great to talk with you. So timely. Mary Lou Gardner, Associate Partner for Consumer Packaged Goods, Retail and Logistics over at Infosys Consulting, joining us on Zoom. Just quickly want to mention HPQ out with their results, stock down 4% in the aftermarket. Company talking about the outlook, sees first quarter adjusted EPS 76 to 86 cents. So they're reining that in. The estimate on the street is 85 cents a share.
So it kind of lags at the midpoint.
Yeah, but that lower end, right, is just maybe what investors are kind of a little bit freaked out about. More analysis coming up, and NVIDIA just around the corner.
Coming up, Bloomberg Plugged In. It's your weekly look at EVs brought to you by Audi. Don't let someone else drive off in the Audi model you've always wanted. Visit your local Tri-State Audi dealer to get behind the wheel of yours today, or visit AudiOffers.com for more information.
All right, I'm keeping an eye on shares of NVIDIA in the aftermarket. It's up about 0.4%. Earnings not out, but they will be any minute. We will break them down, share them with you, and have complete analysis of the quarter and the outlook. It's coming up.
digital transformation.
Thinking in terms of some of the older names that have these new chips coming out.
Okay, so just got about a minute and a half left. What would you ask on the conference call? You mentioned about China coming up, but what is front of mind or front, for you in terms of the NVIDIA story, Dan?
Well, the China issue, which we mentioned, and also how does NVIDIA continue to defy gravity in regards to the data center space, right? We know that Acer, we look at all these competing IaaS programs in terms of AWS and GCP. We're seeing growth rates slowing down, and yet we see continued increased spending towards NVIDIA, the AI space, and the data center. So will they eventually fall suit to this slowdown? So obviously getting a little bit more information about how they're seeing the data center space and why they're growing when everyone else is deaccelerating.
Would you buy or sell on this news today? Just got about 20 seconds left here.
Yeah, Carol, NVIDIA's been a long-time stock on our buy list. Obviously, for clients that have the proper investment objective and risk tolerance and they don't own it, it would be something that we look at. The stock's not crazy. It's 45 times fiscal year 2024 earnings, and we're already going into the fourth quarter. So everybody hangs their hat on that trailing multiple, but it's not that overpriced if you look at the forward growth rate expectations in terms of earnings.
Only up 240% this year, Carol.
Yeah, stock's still down about 1%, but it is like you look at the dynamic growth that we continue to see at this company. Dan Morgan, have a great evening and a great holiday. Dan Morgan over at Synovus Trust.
Hey, let's get a check on the latest world and national news. We got Nancy Lyons back in the Bloomberg 99.1 Newsroom in Washington, D.C. Welcome back, Nancy.
Thanks, Tim. The Biden administration is speaking confidently that the world will see the remaining hostages, or at least some of them, held captive by Hamas militants, soon freed. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller.
At this point, everything is not yet final, but we are close.
Miller says any deal would unlock the potential for more humanitarian assistance in Gaza. Bloomberg Sound On spoke with Daniel Freed, who is a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council, a former Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, and former ambassador to Poland. He says this deal could serve as a stepping stone to peace.
This possible deal for hostages and a temporary ceasefire could be a first step, but that's a small first step, and the steps after this get harder, not easier.
Ambassador Freed believes the U.S. is likely to be involved in these negotiations. The U.S. has secured a guilty plea from the CEO of Binance, the largest global cryptocurrency exchange. Attorney General Merrick Garland says Changpeng Zhao, also known as CZ, pleaded guilty to criminal charges and will pay a fine of $50 million.
Zhao willfully violated federal law that requires financial institutions to guard against money laundering and terrorist financing.
The Binance exchange was also ordered to pay a $4.3 billion fine, which Garland calls one of the largest ever against a company operating in the U.S. The Attorney General says in the past month, the U.S. has successfully prosecuted those running two of the largest cryptocurrency exchanges. President Biden is ordering flags across the country to be flown at half-staff to honor former First Lady Rosalind Carter. She passed away Sunday at the age of 96. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. NVIDIA, the world's most valuable chip maker, is slipping in extended trading after its latest forecasts failed to meet the sky-high expectations of investors betting on a boom in artificial intelligence computing. Right now, we've got NVIDIA shares lower, down by about 0.9%. Dan Morgan is with Synovus Trust, and he is awaiting the earnings call. He was a guest moments ago right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
So how does NVIDIA continue to defy gravity in regards to the data center space, right? We know that Azure, we look at all these competing IaaS programs in terms of AWS and GCP. We're seeing growth rates slowing down, and yet we see continued increased spending towards NVIDIA, the AI space, and the data centers.
And again, shares are lower now by 1% after hours. Binance Holdings and its CEO Changpeng Zhao have pleaded guilty to criminal charges for anti-money laundering and U.S. sanctions violations, including allowing transactions with Hamas and other terrorist groups under a sweeping deal with the Justice Department designed to keep the company operating. Sam Altman, members of the OpenAI board, and the company's interim CEO have opened negotiations aimed at a possible reinstatement of the ousted CEO at the AI startup he co-founded, this according to sources. Stocks, bonds, and the dollar barely budged after the Federal Reserve minutes reiterated the central bank's cautious approach, with traders focused on NVIDIA's results after this year's blockbuster rally in big tech. Here's where we ended the session today. The S&P 500 index down 9, dropped there at 0.2%. The Dow also down by 0.2%. NASDAQ down 0.6%. 10-year yield 4.39%, with the 2-year on this Fed Tuesday at 4.87%. Spot gold up $20 the ounce to $19.98, while West Texas Intermediate crude little change, down 2 cents, $77.81 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol Master, Tim Stanovic, live in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio on YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. Hey, folks, one of our top stories in what was, I thought, going to be a quiet holiday shortened trading week kind of thing isn't the case. As you heard Charlie breaking down NVIDIA, bouncing around in the aftermarket. It's definitely off, though, its worst levels of the aftermarket session. Just down, I'm looking right now, down about 0.9% here. And just the expectations, it seems like we're just so high in terms of where the outlook would be. It's still above the street estimate.
But is it above enough?
But as Dan Morgan said, you know, all of a sudden we're going back to whisper numbers. Remember, we used to talk about that all the time with earnings.
We still do with jobs numbers a little bit, not earnings.
A lot. Yeah, I guess.
With jobs
a little
numbers,
bit with jobs.
The employment report. But
other
than that, definitely not earnings. No. You know, this does stand out, though. The expectation that sales to China are going to decline significantly in the fourth quarter. We should note that NVIDIA also saying that sales in other regions will offset that. So I think potentially that causes some concern. The sales guidance was higher than estimates for next quarter at around $20 billion in fourth quarter sales, despite that China warning. We're going to wait to see what they say on the call and what analysts ask on the call, because still it's kind of early days here.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at our Markets Live blog, and there's a headline, NVIDIA's less than perfect results failed to impress, and just noting how equity sentiment wavered in the post-market trade in the immediate aftermath of NVIDIA's earnings report, where the results showed both estimate-topping revenue, slightly higher than anticipated expenses. Firm, as you just mentioned, we talked a little bit about China. Firm also sees sales to China dropping significantly in the fourth quarter, but added that that decline will be offset by growth in other regions. So as our team takes it all into account, says that's likely not good enough for a strong rally across Wall Street. And I'm looking also at E-mini futures. They, too, were down a little bit in the aftermarket at this hour.
Yeah, and look, shares are up 240%.
I should say NASDAQ 100 E-mini futures.
Shares are up 240% so far this year, Carol.
Yeah, no, it's a top-performing stock in the S&P 500. Yeah. It's been on a tear. And I remember that first report where it was kind of like we all got kind of excited about NVIDIA, and we're saying that, man, it's got to deliver because the expectations were so high. And it did deliver, and it has been delivering. But again, as each quarter goes by, I think the expectations get even higher and higher, considering that. Dan Morgan said when you look at the valuations, he didn't think it was so crazy. He wasn't talking about trailing. He was talking about, I guess forward-looking PE of about 45.
Okay, we'll continue to follow all the earnings moves when it comes to NVIDIA, and we'll have an ear to the call from thanks to our Bloomberg News team, and bring you any updates there. It is time now for another edition of Bloomberg Plugged In. It's your weekly look at EVs, and all is not well when it comes to the world of EVs. Earlier today, Carol, we got the news that Ford is reducing capacity and hiring plans at a battery plant that it's building in Michigan because it sees weaker demand for EVs. Remember, sales of its signature F-150 Lightning plug-in pickup fell 46% in the third quarter.
All right, so let's see what Brendan Jones has to say about that. He is president and CEO at Blink Charging. It's a $241 million market cap company, trades on the NASDAQ. It designs, makes, owns, and operates EV charging stations. And the company says it's contracted, sold, or deployed nearly 85,000 charging ports around the world. He joins us on Zoom from Miami Beach, on the phone from Miami Beach, Florida. Hey, Brendan, great to have you here with us. Stock took a hit today, down about 7%. You're down about 67% year to date. Before we talk about the business, because you guys had a good quarter, what are you hearing from your investor relations teams about what's going on? Why is the share price seeing so much pressure to the downside?
So, I think the whole industry, if we look at the EV charging industry and then more broadly at the EV industry in general, we've been under a lot of pressure for the past year. There's a marked difference from the frothy years that we saw about 18 months plus ago to where we are now. And all the EV infrastructure companies seem to be suppressed at a much lower valuation. And if you listen to the advisors, what everybody's saying is the same thing. It's great to be a growth company, but we're focusing on profitability now. So you got to continue to grow, and you've got to give us a definitive path towards profitability. And that's what we've done on Blink. We give them the timeline and a target, and we intend to get there by December of 2024.
Well, you're not going to grow if they don't grow the number of EVs that are out there significantly. And I think that's an important thing that I want to get from you, Brendan, is what's going on with EVs? I thought EVs were the future, and now on some dealership lots, they can't get rid of these things fast enough.
Yeah, I mean, there's some micro issues in the industry, but when we look at aggregate sales both globally in the United States, they're up year over year and continue to be up. 8% was the sales pen rate on a U.S. basis. In California, it was 22%. In one of the earlier months of the quarter, it was actually at 25% in California. California has the 2035 mandate of nothing but internal of EVs can be sold in the state, and several other states have adopted that same thing. So I think we're certainly seeing a little bit of a downplay in the sales volume, but over time, based on regulation and OEM commitment, we're going to see an uptick. And when you look at the broader numbers, we're looking at a 2030 number of just 35% EV penetration rate, and that would necessitate a need for 30 million chargers within the United States alone. So while there's some blips right now, we're still encouraged by the overall economic positiveness of the whole space, especially the states that are mandating EVs and zero sales of internal combustion engines.
Brendan, unfortunately, we only have about 45, 50 seconds left here. How do you compete, though, with the likes of Tesla that continues to open up its charging network and capabilities to other automakers?
Yeah, well, Tesla is primarily a DC fast charger owner-operated model. Blink is a full-on vertically integrated sales model where we sell chargers. The majority of the chargers we sell are L2 chargers, and we own and operate them as well. So Tesla is primarily highway-based charging. We provide charging in the metro. We provide charging in the home. We provide charging at multifamily dwellings. And we do it when we install and own or operate at far less the cost of the expensive DC fast charging. So it's a completely different business model, but we'll also be deploying chargers that can charge Teslas. And if we look more broadly at what our number one customer is who plugs in the Blink, it's Tesla drivers.
Listen, promise to come back soon when we have a little bit more time. We would love to continue this conversation. Brendan Jones is the president and CEO at Blink Charging, joining us on the phone from Miami Beach, Florida. We continue to watch NVIDIA in the aftermarket, now just down about 0.9%. Looking for some headlines coming off of that analyst call. We'll continue to monitor. You are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week right here on Bloomberg Radio.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We're keeping an eye on NVIDIA shares after hours. The stock right now is down by 1%. Investors gave a cool reaction to its latest quarterly report, which blew past average analyst estimates but failed to satisfy the loftier expectations of shareholders betting on an AI boom. Again, after hours, we do have NVIDIA shares down now by 1%. Broadcom's $61 billion takeover of software maker VMware has won approval from Chinese regulators, albeit with a list of conditions it'll have to fulfill. With more on that story, here's Bloomberg's Tom Busby.
Charlie, it represents the final hurdle for the company's $61 billion merger. The conditions are tied to how the companies sell their products in the Chinese market, including making sure VMware's server software is interoperable with local hardware. The Chinese state market regulator said it'll approve the deal if they've met and that it has the right to supervise and inspect the company's adherence to the restrictions. The combination of the U.S. chip maker and cloud software company, one of the biggest technology mergers ever, and has already received clearances from the EU, the U.K., South Korea, and Japan. Charlie?
And that's Tom Busby reporting right now. Broadcom down 1.5%. VMware today fell by 5%. Binance Holdings and its CEO Changpeng Zhao
And Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
It's Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek live in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio in New York. Let's get a check on the latest world and national news. For that, we go to Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Hey, Nance.
Thanks, Tim. Israel's cabinet has been meeting to discuss a possible deal with Hamas to release some hostages in return for the release of Palestinian prisoners being held by Israel. The State Department's Matthew Miller is sounding hopeful.
We are very close to an agreement, but we are not there yet. As you have heard us say a number of times over the course of the past few weeks, nothing is final until everything is final. And at this point, everything is not yet final, but we are close.
Again, that's the State Department's Matthew Miller. The developments come as international pressure grows on Israel to end its more than 6-week retaliatory offensive in Gaza, which authorities in the Hamas-run enclave say has killed more than 13,000 people and triggered a humanitarian crisis. Well, it's a busy travel week with more than 55 million people expected to travel at least 50 miles from home for Thanksgiving. Most travelers will be driving to their destinations. Experts say the worst time to be on the road will be between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. Wednesday. And as Bloomberg's Liliana Byington reports, transportation officials are hoping flight disruptions will be kept to a minimum.
The transportation department is saying that one thing they're going to be doing to lower the delays that you're going to see is if the schedules get messed up, they're going to try to make sure that the commercial airplanes that you're taking are able to leave first over private jets.
Byington says the Federal Aviation Administration is estimating that there will be almost 50,000 flights tomorrow, which would surpass last year's numbers. Fans of the Rolling Stones will get some satisfaction next year. The Rock and Roll Hall of Famers announced they will hit 16 cities across North America beginning in April. The Hackney Diamonds Tour will kick off April 28th in Houston and visit cities like New Orleans, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Denver, Chicago, Boston, and New York. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Tim and Carol.
All right, Nancy Lyons in D.C., thank you so much. Hey, guys, we're just kind of obsessed with NVIDIA, watching it in the after hours, a little bit lower, waiting for some more analysis on that analyst call. But if I look at the top stories on the Bloomberg, the most read in the past 60 minutes, 5 out of the top 10 have NVIDIA in the headline.
I guess it makes sense. People want to know what's going on with the company. I like this this Ian King headline. NVIDIA investors give ho-hum reaction to latest growth surge. Investors are giving a cool reaction to its latest quarterly report, which blew past analyst estimates but failed to satisfy loftier expectations of shareholders betting on AI and an AI boom.
It's kind of like, wait a minute, revenue in the current period, so we're talking about the current quarter, it's going to be about $20 billion according to the company. They put that out with their earnings release. And though that topped the average analyst estimate of $17.9 billion, some projections reached as high as $21 billion. We were talking about about these whisper numbers that have been out there. I'm looking at NVIDIA. It's down about 1.1% in the aftermarket.
Shares did slip as low as 6.3% initially, and we were kind of scratching our heads what's going on. NVIDIA posted another quarter of impressive growth. Investors were anticipating more. They've poured money into the stock. It's up 242% this year. On the hopes that the AI industry would bring explosive sales gains for the company.
Yeah, and they hit a record yesterday, I believe, in the trade, an all-time high. The company has been the best performing stock on the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index this year, sending its valuation to more than $1.2 trillion. In fact, its market cap now more than $1 trillion bigger than that of rival Intel, which until recently was the world's largest chip maker. Listen, the changing dynamics for Intel, I feel like that's been a few years in coming. We talked about NVIDIA versus AMD, its much smaller counterpart, and just NVIDIA is trying to right their ship, change things around. But
you mean Intel?
Intel, forgive me. Yeah, NVIDIA's got a chip.
Yeah.
Just fine.
It's up 242% so far this year. There are those coming after it, though, and another threat to